Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
A national consensus began to crystallise in Britain over the last few weeks that Tony Blair has become either mad or bad, and in either case, dangerous to know. It began with his Bloomberg speech, a couple of months ago actually, in which he appeared to postulate a kind of Orwellian, never-ending war between West and East. And then was that strange appearance, as if from the war zone, as Iraq fell apart under an advancing al-Qaeda attack, in which he absolved himself and President Bush of all blame, and instead called for us to launch yet another war, this time against both Iraq and Syria.
Taken together with a catastrophic situation being faced by the Palestinian people under siege in Gaza, under lockdown in the West Bank, and under illegal annexation in Jerusalem, it just all became too much for people on the right as well on the left. From the Mayor of London, the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph to, well, people like us. It's time for Blair to go, at least as the so-called Middle East Peace Envoy. So said thousands of people in just the first few hours of a new petition at sackblair.org, addressed to the leaders of the Quartet, the UN, the EU, the US and Russia.
Reflecting the consensus, it is headed up by both Tory grandees and left-wing luminaries. Preeminent amongst the latter, Professor Noam Chomsky, and our first guest, former Conservative Government Minister and distinguished expert on the Middle East, Crispin Blunt MP. He was on his way to a very important engagement at London's Guildhall, but we squeezed him in before we'd even finished making the set. Listen to this. Crispin Blunt, this apparently sudden crystallisation across the political spectrum that I talked about in the introduction, what do you think's the proximate cause of that?
Well, I think there are lots of causes, and the different signatures to your letter all have given slightly different perspectives in their own explanations in the press release that accompanied the statement. And for some people, it's simply that he was the whole business about 2003 and the case made to Parliament and how that's all become very badly unpicked. As time has gone on, for some people that meant he was an incredible figure from once that was established. For me, actually, it's rather different. My view is that regardless of the merits of the 2003 presentation and the decision and the consequences, or indeed perhaps because of it, I think as he left office, he wanted kind of to find a role that would enable him to make up some of the damage that had been done by his policy at some level. Now, he would never present it like that, but I was very surprised to be able to go to Downing Street to have a meeting with Tony Blair with the All-Party Palestine group shortly before he left office, and he was very seriously engaged in the Palestine issue. And then when he accepted this appointment as the Quartet envoy, I thought this presented an opportunity, empowered by the Quartet, and if he had been able to play a political and an economic role, then he would have been a very powerful figure to bring the parties together. But of course, almost within weeks, the Bush administration had made it perfectly clear politics was for them and wasn't for him, which simply left him with this economic role, which he has energetically pursued. But now the politics has collapsed again. Frankly, that economic role is really redundant because we're never going to repair the economy of Palestine.
Because 7 years, I mean, there have been 7 fat years for Mr. Blair, which is another question, but they've been very lean indeed years for the Palestinian people. The Gaza siege continues, the people in Gaza living on the brink of starvation. Mr. Blair's been 117 times, he boasts, to the area, but only 1 time to Gaza. The lockdown, as we speak, in the West Bank, mass arrests, killings on a daily basis. And of course, Jerusalem going through its own particular calvary. The Palestinians overwhelmingly say that he was, from the beginning, in the pockets of the Israelis.
That was always going to be the problem, given the policy positions he had taken as Prime Minister. And he was going to have to establish credibility that he was actually properly empowered envoy who was going to listen fairly to both sides. And quite quickly, he became, as you say, completely focused on the West Bank and just on economic issues, and therefore engaged just with the Palestinian Authority and not the whole wide political representation of Palestine, which, as we know, goes much further than the parties making up the authority.
And wasn't maybe the last straw that broke the camel's back for many people the disaster that is now overcoming Iraq? Whatever view one took on the war, we took different views. Manifestly, it has all gone badly wrong when Al-Qaeda are in control of half the country and Shiite militias are tooling up in the other half. Clearly, this is not what people thought was the objective of the Western allies who went into that war.
Well, obviously, it has turned out to be a catastrophe. It was an utter disaster with the insurgency that then followed. Awful decisions made to disarm the Iraqi army, which would have been a force for stability in Iraq, and then you just put a whole lot of unemployed officers and soldiers on the streets and wondered why it went sour even quicker than it might otherwise have done, even if you had been able to control the Shia Sunni-Kurd tensions within Iraq. And so here we are 10 years later, and Iraq as an entity is pretty much a busted flush now, and we need to face up to the realities of new geopolitics there and actually create entities that are going to have the support of their populations. And it's going to mean some ugly choices in terms of population movements and the rest that are going to look a bit like the partition of India.
Mr. Blair famously became a Roman Catholic, but penitence doesn't seem to be anywhere in his religious vocabulary. He was out fighting as the state in Iraq was collapsing, saying not only that it wasn't my fault, but that we will have to go in again. Did that kind of gung-ho attitude from him surprise you?
It didn't surprise me, but it sounds pretty desperate now. I mean, all the evidence around is that the approach that the Bush and Blair administrations took in 2002-03, and obviously the consideration of the attack on Iraq and then the attack on Iraq has turned out to have utterly disastrous consequences. We've very badly mishandled the relationship with Iran, for example. I was in the House of Commons, and as you gently pointed out, I did vote for the war in 2003, but I partly voted for it because I was a soldier. Our guys were on the start line. We were presented with a decision when 12 hours later, colleagues of mine former colleagues of mine were going through their battle procedure in order to cross the start. Utterly ridiculous for Parliament at that point to turn around and say, no, stop. And I have to say, I sat there in the House of Commons and listened to Tony Blair, and it was the most... and I kind of knew this man had a reputation for, how should we say, not being necessarily as much integrity as one would necessarily expect of a Prime Minister over the period. Very convincing presentations on other things. On this, I absolutely, I thought that's the real deal. I was convinced by his presentation and the case he made.
For others, it has been the Egypt imbroglio. Tom Watson, the redoubtable now backbench Labour Member of Parliament, just signed up for the sackblair.org petition. And he said, for me, Egypt was the last straw, by which he meant Mr. Blair's apparent blank check to the military junta in Egypt and the mass killings that they engaged in, his apparent endorsement at the criminalisation of the party that actually won the last, perhaps only ever, democratic election in Egypt.
Four of them.
Yes. Now he's right on side with General Sisi, and indeed Alistair Campbell, his former spin doctor, is now doing a bit of spin doctoring for them, God help them. You very courageously were right in, close up to the action in the squares in Cairo and wrote very powerfully about it. Again, were you surprised at Mr. Blair's stand, or does this just compound it all for you?
It's kind of his position, to be fair to him, has been wholly consistent since the Chicago speech and this doctrine of his interventionist doctrine that he produced then. It has been an utter disaster wherever it's been implemented, and we are giving the authority for powers like China then to intervene in Africa in years to come when they see their interests being upset by Africans who will eventually get fed up with the amount of occupation of their assets and their countries that China will effectively have achieved by then. So we're going down a pretty dangerous road with this responsibility to protect doctrine by them, because we're straight into an international law grey area, and it'd be infinitely better to rely on clear international law that be produced by United Nations Security Council resolutions. And when we've departed from it, we now have a position where Russia, quite rightly, takes exception to Western exceptionalism. You've now got a terribly divided society in Egypt, and the consequences of which we'll have to see. But I can't make things any better, sentencing thousands of people to death and holding 25,000 people in custody who, not very long ago, commanded a mandate, and I think in about 4 elections they were on the winning
the
side.
Parliament, the presidency, the Constitution, that's at least 3.
Yeah.
Crispin Blunt, I know you have another important engagement in the Guildhall. Thanks for squeezing in the Sputnik. Coming up after the break, it's Her Excellency Alicia Castro, Ambassador of Argentina to the Court of St. James. Doesn't get much more distinguished than that. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sputnik. 32 years ago, a lot of men left their guts on Goose Green to prove how brave a soldier Margaret Thatcher was, and hundreds of Argentine sailors were sent to a watery grave, shot in the back on the Belgrano as they were leaving the war zone, on Margaret Thatcher's personal order. The UK taxpayer has expended many billions of pounds in defence of a population smaller than the English village of Nether Wallop, living 8,000 miles from the country they call their own, ours.
Britain's isolation in Latin America is virtually complete and very expensive. Yet, still this preposterous appendage of British colonialism continues. It's Gilbert and Sullivan's farce at our expense and in every sense.
Gayatri went out to listen to what the people had to say about this farce.
A lot of people lost their life and a lot of money was spent. England got a bit of political kudos, or war kudos, as you might say. Argentina got a bloody nose. So that's how it read. When there's no oil, there's no diamonds, there's nothing there.
No, it's just a piece of rock.
It's a piece of rock. But they will fight for it. That's the British for you.
They should be back here trying to sort out here instead of over there 9,000 miles away, you know?
Share!
It's all British.
Hurry up and get together and share.
England don't give back. They don't give back. If they got it, they're not going to give it back.
It's nearer to them, so really it should belong to them, shouldn't it? Really, come on, be serious, you know what I mean?
So what are they doing there?
Well, our next guest is one of Argentina's crack diplomats, having previously been a close comrade of the late President Hugo Chavez of Venezuela, one of Argentina's greatest friends. And I'm pleased to say she joins us now, Her Excellency Ambassador Alicia Castro. Ambassador, thanks for joining us. You must be pretty gratified, pleased with what you heard there on London streets.
It's really very interesting, but it's not a surprise for me. It doesn't come as a surprise, Mr. Galloway, because we normally meet many people and many organizations that not only were at the time against the war, because the war, as you know, it had been organized and decided by a criminal junta that at that time ruled our country, and that already was killing people in our own country, the 30,000 desaparecidos, the disappeared people at the time. So it was a dictatorship that was using the war as an excuse to, and a stunt to remain in power. So it was for the worst of reasons that they went there for the war. And it's striking that the government of the United Kingdom that did negotiate from 1967 to 1982 until the war time with this dictatorship is nowadays not wanting and not able to have a dialogue, a proper dialogue with a democratic and popular government of Cristina Fernández de Kirchner.
It is odd, because even Mrs. Thatcher was prepared to discuss, at least, perhaps endlessly discuss, maybe never agree, but she never pretended she wasn't ready to discuss the sovereignty claim and the possibility of shared sovereignty. I, in the British Parliament, have been arguing for a sharing of sovereignty over the Malvinas, and perhaps more importantly its surrounding waters, because one of the vox pops was wrong there when he said there's no diamonds and no oil. I don't know about diamonds, but there's plenty of oil in them there seas. Is shared sovereignty something that the democratic government of Argentina would discuss with the British?
It was discussed in the past. As we said, between 1966 and 1982, there were many options discussed and the documents drafted. I'm sure that the inhabitants of the islands would have a much better way of life than what they have today. In the first place, as you mentioned, there is oil, but they are doing exploration, which is clandestine, because under Argentine law and under the United Nations, while the case is being dealt in the Decolonization Committee, you cannot do unilateral things, not one government or the other. And they are exploring and try to exploit their hydrocarbons. And it isn't feasible without a proper link with the continent, without a proper logistics, without organization. If Argentina would be exercising its sovereignty, they could exploit their hydrocarbons and even own the profits as any of the other provinces in Argentina does. They would have a better life in terms of communications, not only with mainland Argentina, but with the rest of the world. They would enjoy our universities that are very good and totally free. They would enjoy a free healthcare system. And they would have a very happy life as the 250,000 of British descendants that live in mainland Argentina. Do you know that we are most probably the most Anglophile country in Latin America, arguably, and we have the largest British descendants community. And we even have the largest Welsh community, apart from Wales, and they even speak perfect Welsh. And I went to meet the authorities of Wales, and Minister Carwyn Jones told me that he sends his official documents to be translated from English to Welsh to Patagonia. Oh. And we are going in the next days with the governor of Chubut, the province in Argentina, in the south of Argentina, where these communities live. And we are going to organize joint celebrations for the 150 years anniversary of the Welsh settlement in Argentina.
You even have a huge Irish origin community, the most famous of whom is, of course, the great Che Guevara.
Yes, he was Guevara Lynch. His family was Guevara Lynch.
So what's not to love? Why do they want to stay with their sheep on this rocky outcrop, claiming to be British, even though Britain is more than 8,000 miles away? Well,
they are British, and they have the right to be British, and we don't have anything against it. They can going on being British. They are British, but the territory in which they live is not. This is not. This has nothing to do, and there is no conflict or controversy with the inhabitants of the islands, but of course with the government of the United Kingdom that should be talking and negotiating with Argentina. I think the United Kingdom government wants to remain in that geostrategical political place in the South Atlantic, in the middle of two oceans. That was what driven Englishmen in the 18th century to try to find a place there and to install their army. And they have a huge military base. They have a base of almost 2,000 soldiers. for a population of less than 3,000 people. So it's the most militarized area in the planet.
There's a UN C-24 taking place as we speak. Are these negotiations going anywhere?
Well, today, exactly while we are talking here, it's the meeting of the Decolonization Committee in the United Nations, as you said. And I'm sure the come out will be the 42nd resolution urging both countries to resume negotiations.
How are you received here? I'll tell you why I ask. Two of the most popular footballers ever in this country, Ozzy Ardiles and Ricky Villa, played for Tottenham Hotspur in England at the time of the war. And yet everybody loved them and loves them still, partly because they were very good players, also because they're very fine people. But there was never any hatred of Argentina in this country. How are you received as you go about? I mean, you meet the Queen, you meet the British ministers, and you meet the public. How are you received?
Well, we very recently had a conference in our house with Ricky Villa and Ozzy Ardiles, and I could appreciate what you're saying, the love of British people, and of course football is a shared passion of English and Argentine people, and those were the first football players that came from Latin America, making a difference, of course. And I didn't know that the goal of Ricky Villa, I still remember one of the best.
Unforgettable.
Yeah.
One of the most unforgettable cup final goals ever.
So, you're a Spurs?
No, but I like good football, and Spurs were a very fine team at that time.
And, well, there's nothing, this, as we said before, this has nothing to do with people. There's a 250,000 of British descendants living in Argentina, and nobody had ever been hostile to English people. I mean, this was the will of the two governments at the time, the military junta and Margaret Thatcher, who wanted...
That was a kind of a military junta too. But now we both have democratic governments.
That is why it's not understandable that they don't. And you know, the United Kingdom government is isolated in this matter because it's all the international community, with no exception, that is asking to resume negotiations and have a proper dialogue between two sovereign nations. So they are not only isolated in the non-respecting the resolutions of the United Nations, but the call of all the international community. Who can survive without dialogue? Nobody can. And
it's an expensive business to do your business through helicopters and nuclear submarines and so on, especially when we live in a country that has many other pressing need for that money. Just finally then, how optimistic are you that things might change?
I am optimistic. I am optimistic. I know that sooner or later Argentina will exercise the sovereignty over the Malvinas Islands. Our work and my job, and I thank you and everyone that is asking for dialogue, is to make that time shorter.
Ambassador Alicia Castro, thank you very much for coming on board the Sputnik.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Well, the people on Twitter and Facebook are unanimous when it comes to Tony Blair. They actually want more than him being sacked. Paddy Grant says Blair should be dragged kicking and screaming to The Hague. He is no better than any other mass murderer. And Donald McRonald says, apart from Blair's totally inexplicable appointment as peace envoy, the Middle East is going up in flames. Well done, Tony.
I think this is an idea whose time has come. I'd be surprised if in a few weeks' time Mr. Blair is still the Middle East Peace Envoy.
Well, in Argentina, we have a different matter. Michael Battersby jokes that, well, looking where they are in the South Atlantic, just off the coast of Argentina, they're obviously British. But people like Liam MacDonald say, no way, they've never been under Argentina rule, they will always remain British.
Well, they've never been under Argentina because Argentina was itself colonized at the time the British colonized the Malvinas. It's time for some political organization to muster up the courage to say, look, actually, we can't even exploit the oil and gas off the Falklands as long as this situation continues to persist. So it's in everybody's interest.
And that's all for this week.
Which unfortunately means that's the end of the show.
Do please keep in touch with us on Twitter at @RT_Sputnik, and on Facebook you can like us on Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.